So in identifying myself as a humanist, I've taken a step away from what might be classed as pure atheism, in that I'm quantifying my ideas, my philosophical ideologies, beyond a mere absence of belief in some proposed deity. I have adopted a label. Yet whilst very few of my fellow atheists take issue with this label, when I begin to associate further with other labels to describe other parts of my complex identity, suddenly I'm taking part in identity politics. Hi there, my name is Peter Ethel. I'm a grassroots humanist. That's to say I don't hold to or represent any larger humanist body or organisation. And today I want to talk to you about Ismism, an ideology I've seen sprouting up here and there that argues we should abandon all ideologies. What I mean by this is, whenever I identify myself by some title such as feminism, for example, I've seen a large movement to challenge that, not on the basis of what feminism says, but rather what it's sufficed with, i.e. the suffix of ism. That's to say, an ideology or political movement, ism. Don't get me wrong, there are those who try to argue against my feminism with points that look at the contents of said identity. That's completely fine. You're not the topic of this video. We're purely talking about those who attack feminism because of the suffix ism. That's it. That's all I'm wanting to discuss with this. The focus of this video is on those who attack said ism. It's kind of funny to see how this attempts to discard feminism simply because it ends in ism has become an ideology in of itself, being a shared belief held by multiple people. That's all an ideology actually is. What I also find incredibly funny is the fact that the exact same people will turn off their brain to the fact that not all isms are an ideology, as seen through atheism, which simply describes an absence of theistic belief and is not an ideology of any kind. But it is an ism. That's just how it's written. It's certain words attract the suffix of ism because it sounds better. They also ignore the fact that ideological systems they agree with, they're ideological systems as well. Most often in my line of work, that turns out to be secularism. There's a big double standard here in how Ismists argue that we should abandon all isms and ideologies as atheists and focus purely on whether or not a God exists. Except when getting political over secularism. Secularism is the separation of church and state and has no relation to whether or not a God actually exists. It's sort of the same field, but it's not intrinsically related. A God or gods existing would not intrinsically make it good to dissolve secularism, and we can't ignore the fact that not all religions are theistic. Many are just spiritual, such as forms of Buddhism and Scientology. Yet I've never seen the same people argue that we should only forward secularism when it comes to theistic religions as it relates to atheism. They seem to cover all religions, even though it doesn't touch on said existence or non-existence of a deity. Now, secularism to me is the only way to obtain religious equality, since freedom of religion requires freedom from religion to begin with. If you lack that, then you end up with, well, contemporary Islam in the Middle East. Likewise, I view feminism as the only way to obtain gender equality. Both are ideologies extended beyond the definition of what an atheist actually is. And a good demonstration of that is my grandfather. A lifelong atheist, he still finds what I do kinda dodgy. he finds it sort of questionable, and the reason for that is he holds some form of traditionalism, i.e. religion has, in his mind, always been a part of British and Norwegian culture. That makes its presence in politics completely legitimate in his eyes. Again, he's not theistic in the slightest, but he doesn't hold secularism in any special regard. And I know he's not alone. There are atheists out there who argue against me and my work on the basis of traditionalism. So, if we can't allow for ideologies such as feminism or any other form of activism because it's an ism, out the window goes secularism. Unless you want to start special pleading. And I think a big part of this hang-up comes from the fact that theists have spent so long trying to class atheism as a religion, and that has resulted in many people hating the word atheism. But that doesn't make sense at all. I mean, I can identify with the title humanism and you not have to. People understand that. But when it comes to more controversial things such as feminism, apparently I can't identify with that without also dragging you into it. That's not how these things work at all. My titles, my self-declared titles, don't affect you. Period. Now we also see something rather similar surrounding other forms of activism. In my life, the LGBT+ community, in how there are people that will go after you rather aggressively if you use a label to describe yourself. Language is evolving in an environment that's more accommodating to LGBT+ individuals. As a result, people are creating newer and more accurate terms that define themselves. Now, they don't expect you to learn them all, but if they tell you what a label is, you have this amazing thing, this great resource called the internet to find out more if you really want to. These labels act as a human index of experience to convey basic information. Once you have the label, you can learn more if you want to, or you can just leave things there as long as you treat the person with the due respect. And yet so often I see complaints about how many titles we now have in the LGBT+ community is killing everything. Said complaints typically falling into two categories. There are those who argue that the plus in LGBT+ shouldn't even be recognised. Sometimes lesbian and gay individuals even argue it should just be the lesbian and gay community. Bugger everyone else. No pun intended. This is even though there are many terms for homosexuality. So if you want to reduce the number of labels in the LGBT+ community, maybe think about doing some self-trimming rather than telling other people that you're not important. The other camp argues that we should just do away with labels. Aren't we all human beings after all? This is a perspective that reeks of naivety. Labels allow a person to A. reaffirm their identity and convey information about it in an easy manner, and B. associate with those who are of the same identity. One of the worst things for a human being is to feel isolated. I thought we recognised that in the secular community. I thought that's why there are so many great deconversion stories taking so many different paths. A person can view through several of them to find the one that matches their own experiences to the highest degree, and then they can reach out to that person if they need help. That's one of the most basic things on YouTube. Almost all atheists on YouTube have at some point done a How I Deconverted story, because it has that sense of identity, even if it's not to do with an ideology. That's just the way it is. It really is that simple, that fulfilling. It's the same for labels in the LGBT+ community or in the ethnic rights movements. It allows people to come together, something important to us as a social species. As for the label of identity politics mentioned right at the beginning, identity has always been at the centre of politics. That's why you have parties. Even third parties or smaller parties are still identities. So if you use the term identity politics to berate somebody, all you are doing is bashing minority or disempowered groups for doing what those in power have always been doing since the dawn of democracy. When I'm being discriminated against on the basis of who I am, you can bet that'll impact my politics, as politics has a real life impact. It's not a game. So anyway, those are just the highlights on how I see the trend of Ismism and the accusations of identity politics online, offline, in general. I hope you have enjoyed, as it's certainly a pleasure for me.